You know what a good trade looks like. You have studied enough to recognize the setup when it appears. You have the rules. You have the criteria. You have sat in front of enough charts to know when the conditions are aligned and when they are not. You are not a beginner who does not understand the market. You understand it reasonably well. And yet you keep losing trades you should not lose. Not the ones where the setup was wrong. Those losses are expected. They are the normal statistical cost of operating in a probabilistic market. I am not talking about those. I am talking about the trades where the setup was valid, where your criteria were met, where the analysis was sound, where everything you have built and tested and refined said this trade was worth taking. And then something went wrong. Not in the market. In you. Now, you moved the stop when you should have held it. You exited early when the trade needed more time. You hesitated at the entry until the best price was gone and then took a late entry that got stopped out. You held a losing position past every rule you have because closing it felt worse than watching it bleed. The setup was right. The execution was not. And the loss was not the market rejecting your analysis. It was your own psychology overriding your own system at exactly the moment the system needed to be followed. This is the most frustrating experience in trading. Not losing on bad setups, losing on good ones. Because losing on a bad setup teaches you something clear. It says the setup was wrong. Improve the criteria. Move forward. But losing on a good setup because your execution broke down does not teach you to improve your analysis. It teaches you to distrust yourself, to question whether your system works at all, to wonder whether the problem is something unfixable. It is not unfixable. But it cannot be fixed at the level of the setup. It cannot be fixed by refining your entry criteria or tightening your stop rules or finding a better indicator. Because the problem is not in the strategy. It is in the psychological state you are in when you execute the strategy. My name is Mark Douglas. I spent decades working with traders. Brilliant ones who failed. Average ones who succeeded. I watched patterns repeat across every kind of trader in every kind of market, and I kept arriving at the same conclusion. The traders who kept losing trades they should not lose were not losing because of bad analysis. Yeah, they were losing because of something happening inside them that their analysis could not fix. That is what this video is about. Not a better setup. A better understanding of why good setups keep producing bad outcomes, and what you can do about it. If you have ever followed your process perfectly on paper and fallen apart in a live trade, like this video now, what I am about to describe is the exact reason it keeps happening. Your brain is not broken. It is doing its job. Before I explain what is going wrong, I need to say something that most trading education never says. The problem is not that you lack discipline. I know that is what it looks like from the outside. And I know it is what it feels like from the inside when you watch yourself break a rule you fully intended to follow. It looks like a failure of willpower, yet it feels like a character issue. Like something is fundamentally wrong with you that is not wrong with the traders who execute cleanly. That conclusion is incorrect, and it is important that you understand why. Because as long as you believe the problem is your character, you will keep trying to fix it with commitment, with stronger promises, with more determined declarations that this time you will follow the rules. And those declarations will fail the same way the previous ones did. Not because you are weak, because you are looking for the solution in the wrong place. Here is what is actually happening. Your brain was built for a different environment than the one trading creates. Over thousands of years of human evolution, the mind developed a specific response to threat. When something dangerous appears, the rational, analytical, the rule-following part of the brain steps aside and a faster, more urgent system takes over. This system does not stop to consult your trading plan. It does not ask whether your rules apply in this situation. It acts. It protects. It does whatever feels necessary in the moment to eliminate the threat. This is an extraordinarily efficient survival system. In the environment it was designed for, it keeps you alive. In trading, it destroys your account. because the trading environment triggers this survival system with something that is not actually a physical threat. A losing position, a drawdown, money moving in the wrong direction. These are not dangers to your survival in any real sense, but your brain does not know that. Your brain registers financial loss with the same alarm it was built to register physical danger. And the moment that alarm sounds, the rational mind that knows your rules and trusts your system and understands probability is no longer the primary decision maker. Fear is, and fear does not follow trading rules. Fear does whatever reduces the immediate pain. It moves the stop to avoid the certain loss right now. It exits the winner early to lock in the profit before it disappears. It hesitates at the entry because the last trade was painful and the body does not want to feel that again. It holds the losing position because closing it means accepting a reality the emotional mind cannot yet face. None of this is weakness. It is your brain functioning exactly as it was designed to function. The problem is that it was not designed for trading. It was designed for a world where avoiding immediate pain was always the correct response. And trading is one of the few environments where avoiding immediate pain almost always produces greater pain later. Your brain is not broken. It is doing its job. The job just does not match the environment. Understanding this shifts everything, because the solution is not to become a different kind of person. It is to structure your trading environment in a way that does not trigger the survival response that makes rule following impossible. And the most powerful lever you have for doing that is the one most traders overlook entirely. Position size. How size determines whether you can follow your rules. Let me describe two versions of the same trade. In the first version, you enter a position. The setup was valid. You sized it at a level that feels significant. This is a real trade, real money. Yet the kind of money that matters if this does not work out. You place the entry and something shifts inside you almost immediately. Your attention narrows. You find yourself watching every tick. Every candle feels personal. When the market moves in your direction, you feel relief. When it pulls back even slightly, you feel a tightening in the chest, a quickening of something. The stop is there. You set it at the logical level before you entered. But now, with the position live and the loss possible, and the size large enough to feel real, the stop does not feel logical anymore. It feels like a threat. It feels like something you need to manage rather than honor. The market moves toward your stop. You tell yourself you are giving it room. You move the stop slightly further away. The trade recovers momentarily. You feel relieved. And then it moves against you again, and the new stop is now approaching, and the same process begins again. You are not following your rules. You know you are not following your rules. But something more powerful than your knowledge is making the decisions. In the second version, you enter the exact same trade. The setup is identical. The analysis is the same. The entry is at the same price. The stop is at the same level. The only difference is the size. This time, the position is smaller. Small enough that the maximum loss at your designated stop is a number you can absorb without alarm. A real cost. A loss that counts. But not a threat. You place the entry and nothing dramatic happens inside you. The trade is live. You check it when it is relevant to check it. The market moves against you, and you register it without urgency. The price approaches your stop, and you honor it. Because the loss, at this size, does not trigger the survival system. Your rational mind is still operating. Your rules are still accessible. The stop was set at the logical level, and the price has reached it, and you exit. Cleanly. Without negotiation. Same setup. Same analysis. Same stop. Different size. Completely different execution. This is what I spent years trying to communicate to traders who were losing trades they should not lose. The failure was almost never in the strategy. It was in the position size that took the emotional pressure beyond what the nervous system could handle while still following rules. Your ability to follow rules is not a fixed character trait. It is a live variable, and it is directly controlled by the relationship between your position size and your psychological threshold for tolerating financial uncertainty. When the size is below that threshold, rule following is natural. You know what to do, and your nervous system lets you do it. When the size exceeds that threshold, rule following becomes a battle between your rational mind and your survival instincts. And in that battle, survival instincts win almost every time. Not because you are undisciplined, because that is how the brain was built. The traders who execute cleanly are not braver than you. They are not more disciplined in some innate, untrainable way. They are operating at a size where their nervous system feels safe enough to let their rational mind make the decisions. That is the entire difference. Oh, and that difference is available to you right now. The 4 ways wrong size destroys good trades. I worked with enough traders to see the same patterns repeat with remarkable consistency. When the position size is too large for the trader's psychological threshold, 4 specific things happen. All 4 of them turn good setups into losses that should not have occurred. The first, hesitation at the entry. The setup appears. Your criteria are met. Everything your system requires is present, but you do not enter immediately. Something holds you back. You wait for one more confirmation. You want the next candle to close. You want just a little more certainty before you commit. The best entry passes. The trade moves without you. Now you are watching a position you should be in from the outside, to feeling the specific frustration of a trader who knew what to do and did not do it. So you tell yourself you will take the next one. You will not hesitate. And when the next setup arrives, the same hesitation appears. Or worse, the frustration of missing the previous trade pushes you to enter the new one late, after the structure that made it valid has already played out, and you get stopped out at a point where a trader who entered correctly would still be comfortably inside the trade. This is not a timing problem. This is fear controlling your entry because the size makes every trade feel high stakes enough to require certainty that trading never provides. The second, moving the stop. You place a trade with a logical stop. The stop was determined by the market structure, and it was placed at the level where the analysis would be proven wrong. At the moment of entry, it feels reasonable. Then the market moves toward it. Suddenly, the loss that the stop represents does not feel like a manageable cost of doing business. It feels like something to be avoided at almost any cost. So the stop moves, just a little, just enough room for the trade to breathe, and sometimes it works. The trade recovers. The enlarged stop was never hit. And this outcome is the worst thing that can happen, because it teaches you that moving stops can be correct. It creates a precedent that the survival system will call upon every time the next stop is approached. Most of the time, it does not work. The stop moves, and the loss grows. What would have been a small, clean, manageable loss becomes a larger one, and the pattern of moving stops. I'd once established does not stay contained to one trade. It migrates across the account as a general policy of treating stops as negotiable, which means the risk management framework you built no longer exists in any meaningful sense. The third, cutting winners early. The trade moves in your favor. The profit is visible and growing, and immediately, at a size that feels significant, that profit begins to feel fragile, like something that could disappear, like something you need to protect before the market takes it back. So you exit before your target, before the structure that justified the original target has changed. Not because the trade gave you a reason to exit, because the size made the accumulated profit feel too precious to risk. You watch the trade continue without you, yet you see it reach the target you had identified before entering. And you understand, watching from the outside, that your exit was not based on the market. It was based on fear. The fear that a position large enough to feel meaningful might reverse and take something that felt important. This is not a targeting problem. Adjusting your profit target will not fix it. The same emotional pressure will simply appear at the new target and produce the same early exit. The problem is the size. A smaller position produces a smaller emotional attachment to the accumulated profit, which allows you to let the trade reach the level the analysis identified before entering. The fourth, holding losers past the stop. This one seems contradictory given that moving the stop early is also on the list, but both behaviors come from the same source. When a trade goes against you at a size that triggers the survival response, one of two things happens depending on the specific emotional pattern of the trader. Some traders cannot face the loss at all and move the stop repeatedly until the loss is catastrophic. Others freeze. They cannot pull the trigger. The position sits there, moving further against them, and they watch it with the specific paralysis of a person who knows what they should do and cannot make themselves do it. They tell themselves it is temporary. They tell themselves the structure is still intact on the higher time frame. They tell themselves the market will come back to where they entered. All of this is the language of a mind that has been taken over by the need to avoid the certain immediate pain of closing the position. The market continues. The loss grows. And by the time the exit finally comes, the account has absorbed something that should have been a fraction of the final cost. All four of these failures have the same root. The position is large enough to activate the survival system. And when the survival system is running, the rational mind that knows your rules is not the one making decisions. Which of those four do you recognize most in your own trading? Drop it in the comments. Be honest. Naming the specific pattern is the first step to breaking it. I want to tell you about a kind of trader I encountered many times across the years I spent working in this field. He was not a beginner. That is the important detail. He had been in the market long enough to understand it genuinely. He had a system that was real. He had back-tested it. He had refined it. Yet he understood the logic behind every rule he had built. If you sat with him away from the market and asked him to explain his approach, he could walk you through it with the clarity and precision of someone who had done the work. And his live trading results were consistently worse than his system should have produced. He would bring me his journal, page after page of trades where the setup was correct and the execution was not. Stops moved at exactly the wrong moment. Winners exited at half their potential. Entries taken late because hesitation had cost him the original price. Losers held through every boundary his system had established. He was convinced the problem was the strategy, that the system had a flaw he had not yet identified. Yes, that there was a refinement he had not yet made that would close the gap between what the system should produce and what his account was actually showing. I asked him one question. What size are you trading? He told me, and the number was the answer to every question his journal was asking. He was trading at a size where every trade felt consequential, where every tick of movement against him registered as a genuine threat, where the rational mind that had built the system could not remain in control long enough to let the system operate. He was not a flawed trader. He was a correctly designed human being trading at a size his nervous system could not handle. So we changed one thing, only one thing, not the strategy, not the entry criteria, not the stop levels or the profit targets or the session times or the instruments. The size. We brought it down to a level where the maximum loss at his designated stop was genuinely, physically, emotionally acceptable. Not comfortable in the sense of pleasurable. Acceptable in the sense of not threatening. The first week at the new size, he told me it felt pointless, that the profits were too small to matter, that he felt like he was not really trading, that the whole exercise felt like practice rather than performance. I told him that was exactly the point, that the feeling of it not mattering was the feeling of his nervous system not being threatened, and that in that state, for the first time, his system would be allowed to operate without interference. He followed his rules that week, not perfectly, but better than he had in months. He honored his stops. He let his winners run to targets he had previously abandoned early. And his entries were clean because the hesitation that had been costing him the best prices was no longer driven by fear of a loss large enough to feel dangerous. His results were better, not because the system had changed, because the psychological state he was executing it from had changed, and the only variable that produced that change was the size. This story is not exceptional. It is the most common story I encountered across years of working with traders who could not understand why their live results kept failing to match what their system was supposed to produce. The system was almost never the problem. The size was almost always the problem. What does trading feel like when the size is right? I want to describe what trading feels like when the position size is right. Not inspiring, not exciting. Something quieter than that. And more valuable. You place the entry. The setup was valid. The criteria were met. The stop is at the logical level. The size is small enough that the maximum loss at that stop is something you can absorb without alarm. And then nothing urgent happens inside you. The trade is live. The market is moving. But the movement does not feel personal. Each tick is information rather than threat. When the market moves against you slightly, you register it the same way you would register any other data point, without the tightening, without the narrowing of focus, without the urgent need to do something that has nothing to do with your rules. The price approaches your stop. You honor it, not heroically, not through gritted teeth and fierce commitment. Simply, on because the loss is bearable, and the rule is clear, and there is no internal conflict large enough to override the process. The survival system has not been triggered. Your rational mind is still operating. The decision your rules require is the decision you make. When the trade moves in your favor, the profit accumulates and you let it. You do not feel the urgent need to lock it in before the market takes it back. The profit, at this size, does not feel fragile. It feels like the system working, like the edge expressing itself over time. You let the trade reach the level the analysis identified because there is no emotional pressure demanding an earlier exit. Your entries are clean because you are not afraid of each individual trade. The setup appears, and you take it. Not because you are brave, but because the size makes the possible loss manageable enough that fear does not override the signal. This is what consistent execution feels like. Not thrilling, not the adrenaline experience of a high-stakes position moving in your direction. Something much more useful, calm, methodical. The specific, quiet experience of a system being allowed to operate without the interference that has been preventing it from working. Most traders resist this experience initially, because it feels too small, because it does not produce the emotional charge that oversized positions produce. Because there is a part of the competitive, ambitious mind that equates small size with small seriousness, with not really trying. That part of the mind is wrong. And understanding why it is wrong is important. Trading is not about the size of the emotional experience. It is about the quality of the execution. A smaller position executed perfectly is worth more over time than a larger position executed poorly. Not in some motivational sense. Mathematically, because a perfectly executed smaller position builds the compounding edge that the system was designed to produce. And a larger position executed poorly disrupts that compounding with losses that should not have occurred, and recoveries that require the next position to be larger, still to compensate. The trader who finds the size at which he can execute without interference has found something more valuable than a better strategy. He has found the condition under which his existing strategy can finally work. The edge is not about being right. It is about what happens over time. Yet here is something that most traders understand intellectually, but very few understand in a way that actually changes their behavior. Your edge is not about winning this trade. A good trading system does not win every trade. A system with a 60% win rate loses 4 times out of every 10. A system with a 70% win rate still loses 3 times in every 10. Even the best systems in the world produce losing trades consistently. That is not a flaw. It is the nature of operating in a probabilistic market. Your edge is what happens over a large series of trades. It is the statistical outcome that emerges when you execute the same process consistently across hundreds or thousands of occurrences. The wins and the losses average out across that series in a way that produces more profit than loss. But only if the process is executed consistently. Only if each individual trade is taken according to the same rules. Only if the wins are allowed to reach their targets and the losses are cut at the designated level. The moment emotional interference enters the execution, the statistical edge begins to erode. When you cut winners early because the size made the profit feel too fragile to hold, you are reducing the average win. When you hold losers past the stop because the size made the loss feel too large to accept, you are increasing the average loss. When you hesitate at entries because the size made each individual trade feel high stakes, you are reducing the number of valid setups you actually participate in. Each of these interferences does not destroy a single trade. They distort the entire statistical series. They change the outcome that the system was designed to produce at the level of the portfolio rather than the level of the position. This is why traders with genuinely good systems still lose money consistently. Not because the system is broken, because the psychological state produced by wrong sizing is systematically distorting every element of execution in ways that corrupt the statistical edge the system was built to generate. And this is why size is not a secondary consideration. It is not the detail you optimize after you have the strategy right. It is the primary condition that determines whether the strategy can function at all. A system that produces a 60% win rate on paper can produce a 40% win rate in live trading if the size consistently triggers the emotional interference that produces late entries, or early exits, and held losers. The system has not changed. The execution has. And the execution changed because the size took the psychological conditions outside the range where rule following is possible. Think about what this means for your trading right now. The question is not just whether your strategy has edge, it is whether the size you are trading at allows that edge to express itself. Whether the psychological state produced by your current size lets your rules operate without interference across a meaningful series of trades. If the answer is no, the strategy is not the problem. And no refinement of the strategy will solve a problem that exists at the level of the psychological conditions in which the strategy is being executed. Bring the size down, not permanently, not as a statement of defeat, as a deliberate, our temporary recalibration to the level where your nervous system can remain calm enough for your rational mind to stay in control. And from that foundation, from the experience of clean execution repeated across enough trades that it becomes familiar, you can build the psychological conditioning that eventually allows you to scale up without losing the execution quality that the smaller size produced. But you cannot build that conditioning while the size is large enough to prevent the clean execution you need to practice. What changes when you stop losing trades? You shouldn't lose? When you stop losing trades you should not lose, something changes that is more significant than the account balance. The relationship you have with your own system changes. Right now, if you are losing trades your setup justified, yet you have a complicated relationship with your strategy. You believe in it conceptually. You have seen it work in backtesting. You have seen it work in the trades where you managed to execute correctly. But you do not fully trust it, because the live record keeps producing outcomes that the system should not be producing. And some part of you has quietly concluded that the gap between what the system promises and what the account shows means the system is flawed. When the execution cleans up, when you begin executing your rules correctly across a meaningful series of trades, that conclusion is replaced by something different. Evidence. Real, live, account-confirmed evidence that the system works when you let it work. That the edge is real. That the process produces what it was designed to produce when the psychological interference is removed. That evidence builds a different kind of confidence than anything conceptual can produce. Not the surface confidence of a trader who believes his system should work. The deeper confidence of a trader who has watched his system work across enough live trades that the belief is grounded in something real. And from that confidence, the psychological threshold changes. The size that previously triggered fear can gradually be increased because the track record of clean execution has built the conditioning that the larger size requires. Not all at once, not through a decision to simply press harder, through the natural, earned expansion of a trader whose nervous system has been trained through repeated correct execution. Yet to recognize that the process is reliable and that individual losses are part of the process rather than evidence that the process is broken. This is how traders actually improve. Not through better analysis, through better execution. And better execution does not come from trying harder at the same size. It comes from finding the size at which trying is no longer the operative word. Where following the rules is not an act of willpower, but a natural outcome of operating in a psychological state where the rules are accessible. Your system is probably not the problem. You have heard that before, and perhaps it did not fully land. Let me say it more specifically. The setups you have identified are probably valid. The entry criteria you have built are probably sound. The stop levels you place are probably at the right levels structurally. And the profit targets you set are probably achievable. The system, evaluated on its own merits, away from the emotional distortions that live trading at the wrong size produces, probably has genuine edge. What does not work is the size you are taking it at, because that size is producing a psychological state that overrides the system at every critical decision point. At the entry, where hesitation costs you the best price. At the stop, where the loss feels too large to accept cleanly. At the target, where the profit feels too fragile to hold. At the loser that needs to be cut, where the size makes cutting feel like too much to bear. The solution is not a new strategy. It is the psychological environment in which your existing strategy can finally operate without interference. That environment is created by size. You trade small enough that each individual trade does not trigger the survival system. Small enough that your rational mind stays in control at every decision point. Small enough that following your rules is the natural outcome of a nervous system that feels safe, rather than a heroic act of willpower from one that feels threatened. Do that consistently, across enough trades that clean execution becomes familiar, across enough losses taken correctly that a loss no longer feels like a catastrophe, across enough winners held to target that letting them run becomes the normal experience rather than the exception. And when you have built that foundation, when the execution is clean and the track record is real and the system has had the chance to demonstrate its edge in live conditions without emotional interference, then you scale. Deliberately, incrementally, watching whether the execution quality holds at each new level, pulling back if it does not, pressing forward if it does. That is how the traders I watched build real, durable performance did it. Not through a better system, through the psychological conditions that allowed their system to work. The trades you should not be losing are the ones your system already knows how to win. Stop preventing it from doing so. If this video named something you have been living with, share it with a trader who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me which of the 4 execution failures you recognize most in your own trading. Subscribe if you want the next conversation in this series. The system you already have is probably good enough. What changes everything is learning to get out of its way.